Good evening, and welcome to episode 85 of the Political Mike podcast. After the most critical midterm election in American history, another whirlwind of a week. Nancy Pelosi, the first woman Speaker of the House, announces today that she will not seek another run for Democratic leadership, but will take on a new role as a rank-and-file member, thus ending 20 years of producing key legislative Democratic victories. President Biden concludes a trip to Asia with renewed political strength, having reinforced the leading role of the United States on the world stage at a time of war, while his political foe, former President Donald Trump, announces his intentions for a rematch in 2024. Senior administration officials in the Biden White House see little chance of attracting any Republican votes for a bipartisan debt limit hike during the short session, and they don't believe they have the 50 Democratic Senate votes needed to slam through a hike using the budget reconciliation process that would allow them to avoid a Republican filibuster. And New Jersey Democrats move forward towards putting abortion on the 2023 ballot, all while a Georgia lower court blocks the state's 6-week abortion ban. Here to help me discuss all of these important topics are some really keen minds on politics and public affairs. We're going to be joined by a couple more guests soon. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of them tonight. We have Mr. Nate Honore, who's a regular on the Political Mic at this point. He is a recent graduate of Quinnipiac University School of Law. We're going to be joined by Joy Ventura, who is a 2L at SMU Dedman School of Law in Dallas, Texas. She's also a recent graduate of Oakwood University, where she earned her bachelor's in political science with a minor in Black World Studies. She's passionate about policy reform and legislative work and hopes to pursue a career in policy and lawmaking, but she's open to anything in that field. We've got Mr. Ishmael, who's going to be joining us tonight as well. Ishmael is a recent graduate of Howard University School of Law. He's also an associate at a law firm in Chicago. He worked for the Investor Justice and Education Clinic during his time at Howard Law, and the scope of his work and his new firm is centered around the capital markets and finance generally. Mr. Stephen Foster, who's a retired AT&T Advertising Services media consultant and account executive. He's also a former business analyst, Dun & Bradstreet. He is now a freelance journalist and blogger and interactive director of whattheyshouldsay.org, a progressive nonprofit public policy advocacy and communications agency. And Arsene Charles, who's a Florida native and an education equity advocate. He formerly served as the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Aerospace Defense and Policy Fellow. He was placed with the Executive Office of the Vice President of the United States. His primary responsibilities included focusing on a diverse portfolio of federal domestic policies, including defense cybersecurity strategy, education, labor, commerce, technology, small business, and financial services. We also have Mr. Egnu Nwampa, who is the head of supplier diversity at Cushman & Wakefield. He is responsible for establishing and maintaining the global supplier diversity strategy. He's a key part of both the procurement function as well as the diversity function, equity and inclusion team. In this role, he is an advocate for suppliers, provides critical information related to current and potential diverse suppliers, leads engagement with external organizations aligned to supplier diversity, and promotes utilization of diverse suppliers globally to both internal and external stakeholders. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making time tonight. I want to open up the conversation with Nancy Pelosi. This is such the end of an era, really. We've got Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. Of course, she waited after the results were finally enough to indicate that the Republicans will now take the House of Representatives. She is one of the most powerful speakers in modern U.S. history. She's going to cede the helm of the House Democratic leadership after 20 years, taking on the role of a rank-and-file member. Since she reclaimed the top gavel in 2018, she's had demonstrated legislative prowess like none other. She has been able to produce wins for her caucus for the Democratic Party, and also keep all the factions of the Democratic Party, whether they're the Blue Dog Democrats or the more progressive wing of the party, she's been able to keep them in line. I want to get your thoughts on Nancy Pelosi's decision to step down. And of course, in her words, she is now stepping down in order to make way for a new generation. So I want to get your thoughts as to her role in history, what this now means, and who could potentially take her place, and whether or not it's, I guess, premature to, pass on the gavel at a time like this.
I would say, or first I want to say that thanks for having me on, Mike. It's a pleasure to be on the political mic show again. I would say Nancy Pelosi, I think, will end up being a very interesting case study on public service, because she was very much so like she had a career that spanned from there was kind of a bridge from old politics to the modern to the modern day politics. But I also think people are going to she may history may look back on and really question how self-interested was her like finances when in office. I think that's one of the things that is often brought up with her name, and I'm not trying to just put that out there blindly, but I know that's like a legitimate concern in someone who is involved in that. So I just think it's interesting to see how history will look at that and look at the separations that may happen after she leaves office with elected officials and them openly trading securities and other things like that.
Well, I look at from another view. I think Nancy Pelosi probably one of the more consequential politicians, maybe ever. She sat through quite a bit. She can say that she was in her seat. I mean, even prior to being speaker, she was in her seat through, the Clinton years, 9/11. Right? She was at her desk. Soon after that, she became speaker in the 2000s. The financial crisis, to a siege on the Capitol while she was speaker in session. I think just that alone, forget about her legislative accomplishments, are going to put her kind of in a league of her own as far as of that. But I think one of the things I've always appreciated about her is kind of the way that she kind of has been able to always stand up in the room of all guys. She never wilted in a group of men, and she was able to command respect. And not that should be something special, but it is something special to do. I'll miss her, even though Hakeem Jeffries is a good successor, in my opinion.
I think one picture that Nancy Pelosi will go down in history for is that scene where she's at the other side of the desk. I believe it was in the Roosevelt room in the White House during the Trump administration. She's, of course, flanked with the Democratic leadership. This is in the aftermath of the 2018 midterm election. The first time the Trump administration had to deal with the opposition party, right? Breaking the trifecta they had. They had the House, they had the Senate, they had the presidency, of course. They had the Supreme Court, but now Democrats were in charge of the House. And there's a scene with her standing up and pointing her finger at Donald Trump. And say what you will, the picture speaks volumes in terms of how she held her own under that administration. But, just to your point, Mr. Nwangwa, I mean, she's held her own under 4 presidents. And she had mentioned that the most significant achievement that she's most proud of is the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And of course, she was able to get through the Inflation Reduction Act, right? A year ago was the infrastructure bill. None of these things were guaranteed. And a lot of folks were looking at the Democrats for weeks and months. For those of you who remember or old enough to remember last year, a lot of pundits were saying the Democrats don't know how to maneuver and have the majority because they haven't produced any legislative victories. Well, Nancy Pelosi was able to produce and wins. And I think she did it because she understood how to make concessions, when to make concessions, and what specifically to concede. And I think that's something that whoever is going to take her place has to understand. Mr. Foster, you're going to say something.
Yeah, she is probably the most consequential Speaker of the House in maybe the nation's history, not only being the first woman Speaker of the House, but, some of the legislation that she's lowered the gavel on. I mean, it's just and her leadership during the insurrection. That was kind of exemplified her her leadership abilities, because we saw her under fire in a situation where, you know, she didn't know if lives were being lost or on the verge of being lost. So you know, some of the things that transpired during her time as speaker were just unprecedented. The fact that she presided over a house that impeached the president twice, you know, that's you know, I mean, she was, and the way she held her caucus together, the discipline with which she was able to demonstrate, you know, what's this guy's name? He is there's an old 1920s comedian who said that he doesn't belong to any organized political party. He's a Democrat. He said, "I'm a Democrat." But Nancy Pelosi kind of defied that bromide. I mean, she really the way she was able to hold a disparate caucus together, you know, under any and all different kinds of circumstances, was just phenomenal. And you know, she was just the model of competency, and you know, very consequential. Not only being the only first woman speaker, but just being perhaps the best speaker, you know, in at least 100 years. So I mean, it's you know, this is an historic day. I will be heartened to see if Hakeem Jeffries can, who is the leader of the Democratic caucus, can ascend to the leadership of the conference, and in its minority status to become minority leader, and then the presumptive Speaker of the House when the Democrats regain control. But that will be historic in itself as well. But she, you know, she named him as a impeachment manager. The impeachment management team that she assigned both times were stellar. This January 6th committee that she pretty much assembled was stellar. So, you know, the list goes on. I mean, she's Nancy's greatest hits will go on for a while.
It's just been so vilified. You know, I know there was a time when Ted Kennedy was the embodiment of all that was evil on the far right side. And now that he's been gone for some time now, Nancy Pelosi has taken on that role, the ire of the far right and conservatives. You know, Trump made it he came out and he said, "I want to end the political career of Nancy Pelosi this year." Right? He said, "I want to end her career." And then in his announcement, which many, even including conservative affiliates, have said was a snooze fest, he says, "We finally ended the political career of Nancy Pelosi," and gets a rousing applause for it. And so she has taken on a lot of heat. We saw it metastasize into real, tangible violence on the 6th, like you mentioned, Mr. Foster, but also against her own husband. And many folks have pointed to that as to why she has made this decision. The attacks on her family, who her husband is still recuperating right now. Joy, you're going to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that in addition to her being like the first woman Speaker of the House, I think that one of the things that really made her time in office so incremental and so just like important is the fact that she tended to stand for what it was that she really did believe in. I think that Mike touched on it, whether it was going to piss some Democrats off, whether it was going to piss some Republicans off. She really did stay steadfast in what it was that she felt was right. And I think that in and of itself, in that position, especially being the first woman, will not only open that door up for other women to come and be able to be, you know, speak how they feel, but also will just kind of put whoever the next speaker is in that position to have to kind of buckle down, and what it is that you really do hope for the future of this country, you need to, you know, stick to it. Got to stick to your guns. And so I really do appreciate that about the time that she's had in office. I think that it was mentioned she's been there throughout a lot of like very big things that have happened in office, and she has been able to hold her own. She has not been, you know, she's not been run down. She's not been any of those things. And I think that that's just in that position generally. The fact that she's a woman is one thing, but in that position generally for that long of a time, to just continue to hold that respect in most reasonable people's eyes. And, regardless of whether you agree with her or not, I think that that's very important to the dignity of this specific position, especially in a time where there's a lot of things that are being challenged about the legitimacy of what positions really mean. And so I think that what she's been able to do and what she's been able to maintain is very important in this time.
That's exactly right. And I want to first and foremost say thanks again for having me on the show, Mike. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and greetings to everyone on the panel and greetings to everyone who's watching now. First and foremost, yes, that is exactly right. Nancy Pelosi has been an effective legislator. And for those in the media, I believe earlier, in the mainstream media, shall I say, Mike, I believe earlier you talked about this sort of narrative, right, in a kind of mainstream discourse about the Democrats' ability to maintain the majority. And let's remember, when it comes to Nancy Pelosi's leadership as Speaker, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that passed in the House, right? Marriage equality, that passed in the House. Lowering the cost for drugs, right? That passed in the House. It's always the Senate, right, where a lot of these things sort of get caught up. And so for those folks who are really committed to the issues, hopefully you can see this as a motivation to get out there and inform the American public as it relates specifically to the issues. Those things are passing in the House. So we definitely want to give credit and laudatory review for Nancy Pelosi on that front. As it relates to this next generation of leadership, there is a conversation that's coming up specifically, particularly among folks who are a part of the progressive wing in the House about Hakeem Jeffries' ability to lead, considering that he's been sort of painted as this sort of moderate, right? And for folks that are committed to the issues, again, right, for me, it's always about the issues. I think it's important to sort of understand that when Black people step into these roles, it's always more than not only being 2 times better, 10 times better, but 100 times better. And that's still not enough. And so I think there will be a veil of anti-Blackness when people are talking about, quite frankly, when people are talking about the report card, right, and how they're doing on how the Democrats are doing once Mr. Jeffries or whoever, right, steps up into that leadership, and so into that leadership position. And so I think it's important to keep a very clear laser focus on that. And then lastly, I think it's also really important to understand that in this next Congress, the Republicans will have a very slim majority, and so that doesn't mean that when it comes to Democratic agenda or issues, shall I say, those things can't be passed, right? Those things can't move forward, especially considering that it's looking very, very favorable in Georgia right now for Senator Raphael Warnock. And so for folks who are in Georgia, please make sure you get out and vote. We definitely need that to happen on that front when it comes to the issues. So those things can definitely progress and those things can definitely move forward. But it comes down to always understanding that, unfortunately, but truthfully, when we think about some of these narratives in the media, sometimes they're not necessarily revealing of the truth, and it's not necessarily telling the full story and the full picture. All in all, again, laudatory review to outgoing Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and I'm taking a step back and ready for this next generation of leadership.
I think it's also worth pointing out that in 2019, when she first returned to the speakership, which made her one of the few speakers to even do that in the first place, she agreed that she would step down after serving 2 more terms. And so she stuck to her word, even though this was a much better midterm result than most Democrats could have hoped for. And even though she faced a massive pressure campaign from Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer to stay on for another 2 years. So I do think that is commendable that she said, okay, enough is enough and it is time to step back. I do think, as far as the new generation of leadership that she has called for, kind of getting ahead and endorsing the new slate of frontrunners, Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn, Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, of the Boston suburbs, and Pete Aguilar, I believe, of San Bernardino, California. She, is able to still maintain a certain level of influence. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like for Pelosi to be a backbencher. Seniority is everything on Capitol Hill, but doesn't necessarily mean she's going to be the top Democrat on, say, appropriations, for example. But I think it's very good that the current slate of leadership has, agreed to step back. This has been a point of contention in the past. And more importantly, I think it's very good that the new slate of leadership gets to come in when they're not in the majority, because this is kind of how they get to test themselves and flex their muscles and develop the strength they need to develop control over such a large and diverse caucus that ranges from, your AOCs and your Cori Bush to Henry Cuellar, for example. As one of the big things I do respect about Speaker Pelosi was her understanding and her knowledge of her caucus. You don't really, even though there are members of Democratic members of Congress who campaigned on not voting for Pelosi to be Speaker, you don't see them openly defying her the way you see Republicans with Kevin McCarthy right now. And that's why, with these slim majority that Republicans will be enjoying in the next Congress, it's very important to see what this new generation of Democratic leadership is able to do and how they're able to slide some of their policy goals through.
Do you guys really feel like this new generation, everyone always says we need new leadership, we need younger leadership. Can they really hold things together? I'm honestly asking you, you guys think that, can they really honestly hold their own the way, you remember the squad wanted to buck against Nancy Pelosi at one time. Then you had Tim Ryan challenging her for the speakership gavel. Then you had the Blue Dog Coalition, some of those New Jersey, right-leaning Democrats trying to, make demands before they see any legislation. And had all of the votes. Do you honestly believe that someone younger, right, like a Hakeem Jeffries or Pete Aguilar or whoever, has the same level of prowess to keep the ship in the same direction and produce such, results on the same kind of level that she has been able to?
Well, I think Nathan's point with regard to them coming in minority status is a great point along the lines of your question, because I don't think they will be they won't be expected to pass legislation, because Kevin McCarthy won't let any Democratic-led legislation get to a vote.
When they get the majority.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I think when they get the majority, I think they'll be well positioned. I think the likelihood of the caucus being more ideologically homogeneous is pretty good too. I think a lot of the conservatives, the blue dogs, and those people both parties are becoming more ideologically homogeneous. The left of the Democratic Party it has pretty much taken over, and the far right of the Republican Party has taken over. So there are very few moderates left. I don't think Hakeem Jeffries and the other new leaders will have too much trouble in coalescing or getting the caucus to coalesce, especially probably because the right wing has gone so bat crazy. So I think that what we're going to see in the next few months, are investigations on Hunter Biden and just nonsense that Kevin McCarthy will be kind of powerless to stop, because he's going to be dependent on his far right the vast majority of his caucus. So he's going to be a weak speaker from that standpoint, which bodes poorly for what's going to happen But I think it'll strengthen the hand. I think when the Democrats do get control again, their hand will be, if and when they get control again, it'll be strong.
I think the Democrats are in a weird position.
Please. Go.
Joe Biden turns 80 today.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, that's definitely something that the Republicans are anxious to point out and use all sorts of their investigative powers to get into his family, his health, anything that they can. You have, I think Hakeem Jeffries was a nudge, and Steny Hoyer stepping aside, right? Because Steny Hoyer could have said, I want the number one spot, and he was well positioned to do that. But him stepping aside is a nod and a wink to they want a new generation of leaders to step forward. Maybe not the newest generation of leaders, but a new generation, right? So I think that's a smart move for everybody. Now, will Hakeem Jeffries, who I make no bones about it, one of my favorite people, is he positioned? Is he competent? Yes. Is he willing to be a lightning rod? Yes. But I don't know. Nancy Pelosi was a lightning rod, but she still had AOC and people like that who the right really hates, right? They really hate AOC. They hate Nancy Pelosi in name and in position, but they really hate AOC because she is unapologetic and she was able to beat them at their own social media game.
I think you also have to acknowledge that the new generation of leaders are all currently in leadership. They're in the lower positions, but they are already in leadership. So they do have some familiarity, with the caucus. Hakeem Jeffries is currently caucus chair. Clark is a deputy speaker, and Aguilar is a deputy whip. So they have a little familiarity already. Now, as far as building relationships, this is where the next 2 years are going to be very important, because in 2024, there were a lot of blue-leaning districts that Republicans were able to capture this time around, and those are going to be the prime pickup opportunities for the next cycle. And so, as Democrats plan to be back in the majority, they need to build those relationships up. As much as you would see AOC and the rest of the squad criticizing the establishment or party leadership, they would never necessarily name drop Pelosi directly out of respect for her. That was, very clear, even when there wasn't always love lost between them. AOC doesn't have that same relationship with Hakeem Jeffries. They're both New York Democrats. They're fairly familiar with each other at this point. AOC actually briefly considered supporting his primary opponent back in 2020. So if they're able to build that relationship, that's how we get a much more functional Democratic majority that is, younger looking and the kind of diversity that the party wants to champion.
Did I hear you correctly and said that Jeffries almost supported, or AOC almost supported Jeffries' primary opponent?
In 2020, yeah.
Okay, and because that kind of lends to, and I get the optimistic statement after that, but that kind of gets to the point where I would question whether this young leadership can control the Democratic Party, because it was one that was splitting when Nancy Pelosi was still at the helm with AOC, and when the squad came on, and during that whole grassroots movement that was clashing quite severely with the corporate establishment that Nancy Pelosi had been governing without much huss or fuss. So I just think policy-wise is going to be one of the main issues to determine how the young Democratic leadership handles the Democratic Party moving forward. Because if policies are leaning more grassroots on the AOC and the squad and the Cori Bush and individuals who are really, I think, supported on a community level rather than on a corporate donation level, as far as like where do their campaign funds come from. So I think that's going to be interesting when it comes down to policy. Can the young leadership get a single line on policy, which the Democrats have always struggled to do?
I would be remiss if I didn't add, as a Northeast Democrat, allegedly she was going to support the other candidate. She never came out and said that officially. Some of that was a heavy rumor. It was out there, but it's alleged because she never took that position.
So that does bring me to the next topic that I want to discuss, and that is that Representative McCarthy has to find him. He finds himself trying to balance now between the different factions in his own party, as his party has narrowly clinched the majority in the House of Representatives. So now that Kevin McCarthy has won the House GOP Speaker nomination, the real work begins for him. His victory over internal critics on Tuesday marked the starting gun for a 7-week marathon, with his majority looking much thinner than many in both parties expected. He's going to need to persuade almost all of the 36 members who opposed him on Tuesday's secret ballot to back him for the gavel in the public floor vote on January the 3rd. While most of the conference's anti-McCarthy voters went to Freedom Caucus challenger Representative Andy Briggs of Arizona, 5 House Republicans wrote in a different name for Speaker and 1 abstained, for a total of 37 in opposition, drawing a map for the California's rocky path ahead to 218 votes. That's the amount he needs to become Speaker. Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania remarked on the effect of the chamber's narrow margins with a quip a Democrat might enjoy. He said, "Everybody's a Joe Manchin." Fitzpatrick helped nominate McCarthy on Tuesday, despite his comment, and he stressed that the current minority leader has earned the right to be Speaker. So in your view, do you think that McCarthy can pull it out? Would he be able to get everyone in line and make himself poised to be able to take the Speaker's gavel, as he bragged that he wanted to do on the campaign trail? This also reminds me of Rick Scott, the senatorial campaign manager for the Republicans, who sought to challenge Mitch McConnell, only ended up getting 10 votes of the Senate Republicans. And in my mind, when you don't do a job well, you don't look for a promotion, right? And so it doesn't make sense to me in terms of not just the results of elections, but even the fundraising numbers. I think Val Demings outraised Marco Rubio for a period of time. Mandela Barnes outraised his opponent for a period of time. You go to Pennsylvania. Fetterman did outstanding with fundraising. How is it that he found all of those things? Meaning, I should take the minority leadership role. It doesn't make sense to me. But Mr. Foster, you're going to jump in. Go ahead.
No, I just I didn't have anything in particular, but it's going to be interesting because Kevin McCarthy. Now this is I don't know if this is appropriate, but Kevin McCarthy is basically a coward. He doesn't have a lot of internal or intestinal fortitude. You see how fast he collapsed after January 6th, after saying that the president was responsible for those events. You see how fast next thing you know, he was down there kissing his ring. So it's like, for him to be in a leadership position with a slim majority, as slim a majority as possible, and to have a Freedom Caucus that is naturally opposed to him. I mean, he's going to get his 218 votes because they have no alternative. I mean, there's nobody that's going to get close other than him. So they will coalesce together rather than let Hakeem Jeffries be the Speaker.
I don't know. I don't know if he gets 218. You have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and people like that who you don't know what they're going to do. I think I give more respect to the Republican long game for even getting in this position, because really they would be under 218 if it wasn't for the stuff they did with the census a few years ago. So
right.
The census, all that census stuff, all these close districts, if you look carefully, there's a lot of Democrats who had to run against each other in the primary because now their districts are won and things like that. Somehow they were able to put themselves in a good position based on the census. So I don't know. I'll leave it up to the fact guys on here. I got Mr. Taylor and Mr. Honore. They typically know all the facts.
Well,
I don't know if it's
just
ever
to be
been
clear, the Freedom Caucus has cost Kevin McCarthy the speakership twice already. Back in 2015, when John Boehner resigned in the middle of Congress, and Kevin McCarthy was majority leader and so decided he was, next man up, and the Freedom Caucus said, no, you're not, and they chose Paul Ryan instead. And then, and the Freedom Caucus has driven Boehner into retirement and they drove Paul Ryan into retirement. That was with significantly larger margins. The big thing they're asking for now is the ability to fire him, whenever they want. And with such a narrow majority, they're, he can't afford to lose, any kind of vote. So really, I'd much rather be Hakeem Jeffries, as unbattle tested as he is, than Kevin McCarthy right now, because you can't give the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Elise Stefanik's and Andy Biggs the kind of keys they need for you to get what you want, without also giving them the keys to kick you out whenever they decide that you've run out.
But he has no choice. He has no choice.
So he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I don't envy his position, but as Speaker Kevin McCarthy with Jim Jordan over judiciary might be very bad for the country, but I think it's very good for Democrats' chances in 24.
Yeah, it's going to be a clown show, and
yeah,
I mean, so it's obvious.
Yeah, Kevin McCarthy. There was Kevin McCarthy, I believe, it was not Dave Bratt, Eric Cantor. It was Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy, and Paul Ryan. The three of them, if you go back 10 years ago, they came up. They were like the three amigos for the House of Representatives. They came together and they wanted to make sure that they were the budget wonks to get everyone else in alignment with where they stand, where their red lines are when it comes down to, what they're willing to give and take with President Obama. Yeah. Kevin McCarthy is transformed into somewhat of a disciple of Paul Ryan's in terms of fiscal conservative wonkiness, into now caving into to this kind of MAGA wing. And then the question now becomes, how much are you willing to give? He gave legitimacy when they were asking him, will Marjorie Taylor Greene have committee assignments? And of course, that question is asked in light of the amount of controversy she has stirred with other members of the House, right? Saying anti-Semitic things, racist things. And he says, well, she is a duly elected member from her district. She will be in committees. Is that enough, giving them legitimacy in that way to kind of get them in line? Or do you think they're going to demand much more from him?
Well,
That's a great question.
With McCarthy and the Freedom Caucus, I think the Republican Party is going through finally, after many Republicans would hopefully not have to seen their party reduced to such, just all kind of words that aren't favorable. And I think now, after really coming up in a dud in an election that everyone told you were going to win by spades and get a 20-seat majority and get the Senate and do all these things, and none of that happened. And the primary cause for that seems to be election denying, seems to be that you're not going to get those last middle voters, but by doing this. And I think the Republican Party has always learned how to win elections. So I think that they will. But to Professor Fals's point, the fact that Kevin McCarthy switched on the January 6th incident it sticks out in my mind when I hear his name. It's such a huge flip and such a huge moment that he caved in for his party, and could have really sent him up. But I don't know. So sorry. That's
But I'll add my voice to this particular question. And so first and foremost, I think it is important to acknowledge that former President Donald Trump went ahead and submitted his bid to enter into the 2024 presidency. And so there is this sort of broader question of, what does that mean for the Republican Party overall? But when it comes to the agenda that many Republican voters believe in, it is the agenda that, for the most part, former President Donald Trump is pushing. Secondly, when it comes to the agenda of the Republican Party, from my perspective, there's a lot of misinformation ranging from critical race theory being taught in schools, critical race theory is not taught in schools, also about abortion, especially in terms of late-term pregnancies, right? Also about marriage equality. And so this is the agenda in terms of the issues, right? this is the type of conversation that a lot of voters, right? I think that's the question in terms of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and some of these individuals that may be considered on the more extreme aspect of, I guess you could say, the conservative agenda or the Republican Party. It really comes down to what the voters are interested in, because guess what? If they're not doing what the voters are looking for, they'll be replaced. And that's what happened with Liz Cheney in terms of being pushed out of that position. Now you have Elise Stefanik. And that's also what happened with a lot of moderate Republicans. Where are they, right? In terms of leadership positions, in terms of adding a voice into the public domain, you don't really see a lot of that. And so I think the sort of evaluation metric is the agenda that a lot of voters are sort of questioning and what they're looking for. What I'll lastly say here, there is a conversation brewing in as it relates to 2024 fielding candidates. Larry Hogan, right? We're talking about DeSantis, right? We're talking about Nikki Haley, with, of course, President Trump. But at the end of the day, none of us will know. Remember, a lot of folks did not think that former President Donald Trump would get the bid until the very last minute when he got the bid. And so I think that's really going to be the challenge, the question, and it could be a benefit, right, for soon-to-be Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy.
Well, I think the loyalists for Trump are getting pushed out of the race. I think that's what the Republican Party is afraid of. Some people who be probably pretty good candidates are not going to run out of loyalty to him. I think he realizes DeSantis is the guy he needs to be afraid of. He already had McCarthy in his pocket. He doesn't have Mitch McConnell because he spent the last 2 years lambasting Mitch McConnell and calling him everything but a child of God. So I think in Trump's eyes, he has Rick Scott. So he wanted Rick Scott to be his guy in the Senate. He has McCarthy flying down to Mar-a-Lago, and he's going to be the Speaker of the House. He's feeling pretty good, you know. And I think him running and the announcement to run is only because DeSantis steamrolled Charlie Crist in Florida, and he doesn't want that to turn into inevitability, even for 1 week. So if Trump could have, he would have announced that he was running prior to the election, just to take all the steam out of DeSantis.
I'll say this: it's kind of like, you know, for those folks who have like exotic animals, and they say, well, you know, they're not going to stay a cub forever. They're going to get big, and they might turn on you, right? And they said, well, he's cute. He makes me look good. I like the status he gives me. I like this baby tiger, right? And then lo and behold, something happens, and there's a freak accident when the tiger gets big. And I think that's a perfect way in my mind to kind of encapsulate or kind of make sense of this whole era since 2015 with Donald Trump. There's a huge section of the population who are sold on this guy, and they're not going to trade him in because the talking heads are telling them that he can't win. He has, given them legitimacy and being brazen with certain policies like the Muslim ban that, folks could only, before Trump couldn't even dream of being a regular mainstream policy. And now you're going to tell me that I should just trade him in for the newest model, DeSantis, right? I think that Trump is sucking all the oxygen out of the room, out of the 2024 primary, no matter who runs. And I do think he's going to be the nominee at the end of the day because this thing has, metastasized into something much larger than a political movement. And I said it on the show before. People have made analogies to cults with this "Make America Great Again" culture regularly, and I think that's apt. But even just pivoting back, go ahead.
You would say that the cult, like, do you mean cult for every single person who voted for Donald Trump in either election would be as like a member of that cult, or not trying to put you on the spot? I'm trying to get understanding with the language.
This is what I mean. When we're looking at cults, right? The leader takes actions and pushes the envelope over time, and the followers go with him no matter what the cost.
I know, but I'm attempting to say that you're trying to point out a group of people who support Trump as the whole group, because you're not making a distinction as some Trump supporters do. It's almost, and I think this is what the Democratic Party has yet to digest, from Trump winning in 2016? Why did so many people vote for Trump? He won the votes were flipped in 2016 electoral college. He won all of the states that Joe Biden won in 2020. So, and but like the Democrats, for me, I haven't seen any Democrats honestly and objectively engage with the fact of why Trump got elected. It's always the easy road of, let me categorize these people as someone who Trump's emboldened their racism. Or was it some of those people? Yes, but it also was people who felt like their government was filled with nothing but career politicians like Nancy Pelosi, who get, so that's, I just never hear that's addressed by Democrats.
Well,
go ahead, Joe.
I think that what it really is that in 2016, when the election occurred, there was obviously ism issues, sexism. There was ism issues there, but they became a lot more prevalent as time went on. I know that, we're all in politics. I feel like I liken it to the same situation as when police officers have probable cause and then exigent circumstances are created, that something else makes it a bigger issue at that moment in time where it needs to be addressed right then. I think that that's what it's like. And I also think that that's why Kevin McCarthy doesn't have as much power right now, is because there are those people who, after that point where it was like, okay, things are getting kind of crazy, they stayed on the ride, they remained on that ride, and they lost rationality. They lost that. That's where that cult formed. It wasn't in 2016. It was after 2016, after repeated lying, after repeated missteps, after repeated faults of to the American people. That's where that cult, narrative formed, because once you are continuously listening to somebody who has proven that they are in opposition of your goals and what the best things are for you, that is a cult mindset. That's what cultism is. And so let me finish. And so at that point, that's when things turned into cultism. At this point in time, the people who are against Kevin McCarthy, I would say a lot of them, they have their very radical and what they believe to be reasons as to why Republicans who are not on his side, because at this point, I think that we've seen there's a stronghold in the Republican Party that goes above rationalism, just like at a basis level that goes against protecting everybody's, interest. And there is a joint interest, which you can all agree is there. Cultism didn't begin in 2016. It began after CNN and Fox News and everybody was reporting that Trump was lying time and time and time again. And yet he still had that strong, almost fanatic, base of supporters. That's when cultism began. So to say that you don't understand why in 2016 he was elected, in 2016 when he was elected, there was already a rationalism there. However, it could be masked by policy. It could be masked by the fact that he had policies that people liked. But after that,
are you trying to paint his everyone who, because tens of millions of Americans voted for him, so are you writing them all off into this category you just described?
No, I just said that in 2016, when people voted in 2016, it was not that. It was as his presidency went on, and there were people who stopped supporting him. Are you telling me that there are?
I will say this.
I do think what Mike meant in the sense of cultism is more in the party's, leadership and superstars, right? You have Lindsey Graham, who said, if we nominate Trump, we'll get destroyed and we deserve it. And then as soon as Trump got elected, became his strongest ally in the Senate. You have people like Mitch McConnell, who plenty of big figures in the Republican Party who campaigned against Trump. Dick Cheney, George Bush actively campaigning against the Republican nominee, only to, when he gets in office, stand by him through everything, right? After the 2020 election, when Trump Jr. said, where are all of my father's friends, fighting? Why aren't they fighting for us now that, when this election's been stolen for us? And even though everyone knew the election had not been stolen, almost instantly, you had Nikki Haley, you had Kristi Noem, you had all these figures in the party saying this election was stolen and we need to look into it. You have members of the Republican Caucus who knew the election had not been stolen and signing on to objections anyway. You have Kevin McCarthy who blamed Trump for January 6th, and then instantly, as soon as they spoke with him, said, you know what, January 6th was just legitimate political activity and political speech. So it's not necessarily the base or, you know, the voters in Ohio in the diners that the New York Times loves to profile. It's the actual politicians within the party who know that Trump is bad for the party, who know that Trump has cost them the White House, has cost them the House, has cost them their Senate majority, and still continue to stick by him anyway because they think that he's their ticket to greater power.
Yeah, you will agree that there is a segment of Trump's electorate, a segment who are cultish. You will agree. I mean, that's kind of obvious, isn't it?
And that's what I was trying to get at.
I think that's blatantly obvious on both sides. So yes, I agree on the Republican and the Democratic side.
I will say this: I never saw a flag that said "Obama Jesus 2024." I have a neighbor who has Trump Jesus as a flag. I've never seen.
January 6th was a cult riot. That was a cult riot. That's all that was.
The cult issue is not about.
So you can't. I mean, you can't have it both ways. I mean, there is a segment.
Let's be honest with ourselves.
It's not about who
Let's be honest with ourselves.
There is a segment of Trump. Trump said it himself. He can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose the following. That's cult.
Instead of addressing the tens of millions of people, let's just say even if 20% or 30% are like that, there's still tens of millions of people that are not like that.
Okay. I don't think anybody's arguing that.
That's not the point that's being made.
Huh? Sorry, go ahead.
That's not the point that's being made.
No, that's the point I made, and everyone's responding.
And we're all responding and saying that those tens of millions are not the people who are being demonized just for voting a certain way.
But they are 100%. I saw endless signs and posts saying, vote for Trump, you're a racist. Like you didn't. Widely. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I will say this: going back to 2016, there were 17 candidates. Trump was not the only one arguing for a flat tax rate. I will say that. So we had 17 choices. What was the difference between Trump and the 16 others? You've got to ask yourself. And let's look at the pattern here. Before January 6th, he's calling for a complete shutdown of all Muslim countries. Right? That was one. He vilified John McCain. That was another. He got into a fight with a Gold Star family, right? Those were just things those are just breaking down the norms, right? As the country was getting more and more used to this and became more desensitized to some of this shock and awe strategies that the campaign was using. Look at who was in his ear, Steve Bannon, right? Someone who was not friendly to any of us on this platform, right? In terms of policy or substance. Look at his immigration policy with Stephen Miller saying we purposefully wanted to separate children from their parents at the border as a deterrent mechanism. Then we get to Charlottesville. Then the comment with S-hole countries, and then the violence that he inspires with people sending bombs to the CNN headquarters, to the Clintons' place of residence, to the Obama's place of residence. Then he tells the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by on the debate stage. They do just that when they come out in droves on the 6th and make sure that they're in place on the 5th. And so we can go down the line and see a specific pattern here. We don't have to pretend. And we know that not every person who voted for Trump was signing on to those things. And that's why we saw such a backlash the Republicans experienced. These Republicans were rejecting Kari Lake. They were rejecting these election deniers for a reason. And a lot of them found themselves voting for the Democratic ticket, or maybe not voting at all, because they could not see themselves subscribing to this yet again.
Yeah, and I would say that the evangelical, who was termed the value voter in the late 90s, for them to turn around and vote for someone who was antithetical to all of their values, there's something there that's making them vote. And it's not just the opposition. I think I was very fine with the evangelical Christian voting for a born-again Christian in George W. Bush. It made sense. It was their guy who they can say, we're all sinners saved by grace, and he's one of us, right? But then when you nominate the guy who says, I don't really pray to God, I just make the situation right myself.
Never ask for forgiveness for anything.
I don't ask for forgiveness for anything.
But
to me, for you to put all of that aside as an evangelical value voter shows some sort of control. That's all I'm saying. It may be strong language to say cult, but there's some sort of control that's there that's making people work outside of all of the values that they were just holding so friendly. And we saw it again with Herschel Walker. I mean, people were voting for Herschel Walker because of Trump. There's no other reason. There's no one on this earth who can look at Herschel Walker and Reverend Warnock and say, you know what, this guy is more competent to do any job except for push-ups, right? So, and I say that because I'm not going to come up here and disparage Herschel Walker, but it's high praise for Warnock for being everything an evangelical wanted except for being in the wrong party, right? So if he was a Republican, he would be everything they wanted, you know, he'd be an American success story. So the fact that they voted for him because of their love for Trump shows some level of control. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ish is agreeing that there is a segment of Trump voters that are cultish. I mean, you agree with that?
Of course.
So that's all we're saying.
But to point that out after my point, it makes me think that you miss my point, because my point is that anytime people talk about individuals who support Trump, they go straight to a cult narrative and don't use a modifying language to say some people who support Trump exhibit cult-like behavior. And not to use that modifier is to generalize someone, and generalizing people is just the easiest way to write someone off, which doesn't lead to conversation, and then everyone's just screaming at each other. But one side feels like they're justified in not engaging with cult behavior. Oh, they're cult, I don't engage like that. I'm not, that isn't going to yield any benefits. But you only get there by generalizing someone.
Right. And can I just add my 10 cents here? I think about being from Florida. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm Haitian, and I want to say that candidate quality matters. And so I heard a point about 2016 that was mentioned. I can tell you right in the North Miami Beach area, there were a lot of Haitian people that were frustrated with the Democratic candidate at the time in 2016, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, for some issues as it relates to the earthquake in Haiti, right? So that's number one. Number two, there were also some people who identified as Black American who were also frustrated related to the crime bill under President Clinton. Okay, yes, there's some sexism that's there, because how can you hold a woman accountable for what her husband did? But let's also remember, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was also talking about super predators. And so therefore my point here is that you did have some people on my Facebook timeline and people that is in my community, in my network, who openly told me that they voted for President Trump. I wouldn't say they're racist. I wouldn't call them a racist, right? They actually have a rationale and they actually have an agenda behind it. So I want to make that clear that I'm not, to your point, Ishmael, I'm not, kind of going against you or anything like that because of that nuance that I know personally. So this is why I think it's always important to stay committed to the issues, right? And so again, at the onset of this conversation, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, they passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act in the House. They passed lowering insulin drug costs. They passed marriage equality. That's what we're talking about here. That's what we're focused on. I think a lot of times people get so caught up on the candidate and the people, and they forget the issues. Although the candidate quality matters, which is what I said, it is important to maintain that focus on the issues. As it relates to DeSantis, I'll tell y'all, he has some Black support in the state of Florida. And so when that comes, if he puts his bid in there, a lot of folks will be looking like, whoa, where's this coming from? Let's go back to the issues. Florida is known as the free market capital. I can tell you, I have a couple of folks who are owners of State Farm, and they made about $3 million. They made about $3 million last year when it comes to earnings for their business. The understanding is that when we have all these sort of social policy initiatives and social policy agendas as people who are more liberal leaning or people who identify as Democrats, that's going to raise taxes. And if for some people who are business owners, whether you're white, whether you're black, whatever it is, that's just not what they want. So I wouldn't say that all people who support former President Donald Trump, I wouldn't say that they're racist or anything like that. But I would say that if you are going to vote for him and to support him in 2024, especially considering that he launched an attack on our country, there is some grave concern. I think right now at this particular moment in time, we can look at 2016, we can look at 2020, but now at this particular moment in time, if you are still supporting former President Donald Trump for his presidency bid in 2024, this is where you can say this is a cult, right? This is politically where we can say this is a cult. Now, that's my perspective. That's my opinion. There's just that. But when it comes to those instances, I wouldn't say, oh, you're racist or you're a cult, because I've seen that detraction, if that makes sense. But here now, listen, if we don't have a country, what else do we have, right? There's this one video on social media. It says, if you can't go to Bella Noche's, then where can you go? If you don't have a country, what do you have? We can't have this discussion at all. So I think that should be the foundation of this conversation, the betterment not only of our democracy and our country. And that's something that candidate Donald Trump, it's a non-starter conversation with him. That's not what he cares about. He's cynical, right? He's shown us that. And that's all that he cares about. But I do want to make it clear that there is some nuance in those other instances because of what I've seen and what I've heard from other people in my network.
And I thank you for bringing that up, Arsena. And I do want to indicate that, I was at the barbershop today, and a lot of the folks in there were saying, "Oh, Trump won't get the nomination. I don't think he's going to be the nominee." And I said, don't underestimate this guy, right? Every time he's underestimated, he ends up defying the odds. I will say this: he benefited a lot from a crowded primary in 2016. And he benefited a lot from folks who were looking elsewhere, donors who were saying, well, let me invest in a Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush. I think that he's going in the front runner, and I think he'll remain the front runner because he has a way of destroying everyone around him and burning down the house, any candidate who opposes him. And I think if DeSantis really wants the presidency, if it was me, I would wait, let Trump fizzle out, let him self-destruct, and then in 28, I'll make the run. But Trump will make it his sole mission to destroy Ron DeSantis, anyone else standing in his way. And even if he doesn't get the nomination, he's not going to go off into the sunset. He's going to run as a third party and pull votes away from the Republican nominee, whoever that may be. That's who he is. That's, he think about what he has to lose, right? It's not just the fact that he wants the White House, but think about the investigations that are ongoing, all of the other underlying motivations that are causing him to make this third bid, unprecedented bid, right?
I would call them incentives. I don't know if they're motivations. Just to clarify, or
what would be the difference?
Well, one of them would be why he's doing something. Another one is just like, I guess maybe even a more different word than incentive. Something that may be a benefit, and that may be a benefit of him gaining that office. But to say that's the reason he's running for office, I think is that you have to know what his intent is. And it may be fair to speculate on it, but it would be speculation unless there's some evidence to say that he wants to run so he can not be prosecuted in the near term. One last, and I think the people, if DeSantis got the nomination and then those people vote for him but independent, that's the cult number. That's the real cult number right there. Just
say that again.
If DeSantis got the nomination and then those individuals who wrote or who vote for Trump as an independent or a write-in, that's your cult number. That's the number that I would agree with.
Okay. Now, Mike, I'm curious as to why you think Trump is after this midterm debacle, followed by the in 2020 was a debacle, 2018 was a debacle from a Republican standpoint. I mean, at what point is he weakened within the establishment of the Republican Party, and by establishment I mean I'm talking about Rupert Murdoch's empire. I mean, at some point, the diminishing returns kick in. They're losing elections that they should win.
This is the thing. I agree that the establishment has given up on him and that he's lost in that crowd. I do look at the reports, the donors that have contributed to his past presidential campaigns. They're saying, look, we're looking for a different racehorse. I do recognize the fact that you've got even folks within the the inner circles of American conservatism saying it's time to move on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the folks down the street believe that it's time to move on. I think that they've been on this ride with Trump for quite some time now, and I don't think they're ready to give up so easily. And I think we're going to see, and Trump himself even mentioned he wants, or those who are his spokespeople have come out and leaked that he would like to replicate the underdog story of 2016. And I think this is a perfect ground game to do that, where you have the establishment giving up on him, but the people, the folks who come out in droves for him, who believe that the election was stolen from him, who want revenge, who want to see them stick it to Biden and those who are the quote unquote deep state. I think those folks are going to fuel him. And next thing you know, everyone, just like January 7th, Lindsey Graham said, I'm done with this. We're done. This has gone too far. And next thing you know, they get right back in line. All of these people saying it's time to give up, it's time to move on. They're going to get right back in line probably by the summer of next year. Yeah,
you can't beat anybody with nobody, but DeSantis is Trump without the baggage. I mean, DeSantis is Trump without the baggage. He's a younger version, a more polished version, but everybody knows that that's Trump. There's no the difference between DeSantis and Trump is non-existent. So, I mean, I'm just saying they have somebody.
Yeah, but the thing is, they've never proven to care about the baggage before, because we've had instances where we always thought this was it. All right, they're going to walk away from Trump at this moment,
right?
Before the 6th of January, and time again, everything goes right back to the way it was.
Yeah, it sounds like you're describing a cult.
I think also it's important to bear out that structurally speaking, the Republican primary system will allow a candidate to win with only 40% of the vote because of the presence of certain delegate-rich states that are first past the post as opposed to proportional delegate allocation. So if Trump wins, say, 45% of the vote in the New York primary and DeSantis wins 40% of the vote, Trump still gets all of New York's delegates, which is not what the Democratic Party does. And that's how he was able to win in 2016 with about 45% of the Republican vote. More identified Republicans voted for Trump in 2020 than they did in 2016. So there definitely are some numbers, there for him. It's not going to be easy. He's not going to be able to just run on cruise control. And to be clear, his announcement on Tuesday was the most low energy presidential campaign announcement I've ever seen. But I would give the advantage to Trump simply because he can win with 40% of the vote.
I just don't think at this point in every election, the people you think are going to be there at the Republican Party are never the ones there, with the exception of maybe Mitt Romney, but who was more of a sacrificial lamb that they knew was going to lose, right? And he did better than he didn't. I mean, he got beat badly, but he didn't get beat as badly as he could have. So I think DeSantis and Trump might start off like it's them, but I don't know. I think, people go with who they can win, and DeSantis looks like he's peaking too early. Right now, he's the flavor of the month. There's 2 long years. That's an eternity in politics for him to get to the finish line.
And I just want to share this here. I have written some things down. I want to make sure I hit these points. So in Florida, DeSantis has removed standardized testing. He's gave teachers a raise there. He's acted on the disasters from the hurricane, and there's also accountability specifically in Broward County where the Parkland shooting happened. And so I think we're going to be very, in terms of how not only we're having discussion here, but very broadly, right? When we think about Republicanism, DeSantis, Trump, when it comes to the issues, because people on the ground, they're thinking about the issues, right? And they're thinking about how they're perceiving it, how they're understanding. I can tell you, I was not a fan of standardized testing growing up. I'm not telling you I'm supporting DeSantis, but some people may, and those people may be Black, right? It may be across a variety of demographics. I can tell you, a lot of teachers were very underpaid, when I was coming up, in K through 12. And so I have a couple of people who I know, friends and teachers, who were very excited about that. And that's specifically for teachers who just started. So there's some kind of detraction there, because for the veteran teachers, they're like, well, how can this person who just entered, get paid the same amount or more than me? So I'm not saying it's a perfect world here. And then lastly, I know that Parkland, that was a kind of a conversation across our country, right? I saw it even going up until the Oscars. And so a lot of folks didn't understand, well, what is it going on with Charlie Crist? What is it going on with Val Demings? We have to dig into, maybe look past CNN, right? Look past Fox, look at some of those local news channels and understand, what they're saying. There were a couple of school board candidates that were appointed by DeSantis that actually are going to move out, right, next week, because you had the election last week, so they're going to be moving out next week. They fired the remaining elected four, I believe it's about four. They fired those appointed folks, appointed by DeSantis, fired the remaining 4 school board members of Broward County that oversees Parkland. But guess what? They'll be out next week. So a lot of people feel very strongly about these issues. And so if and when DeSantis becomes a nominee, we may say, oh, racism, racism, racism. Let's think about the issues and how people are understanding it and how they're perceiving it. And if this is the candidate, then at the end of the day, people just kind of toss their cards up. Well, this is the candidate, right? Maybe they don't agree with him. Maybe they don't like him all the way, but this is our candidate. So I just wanted to provide that for some context and some nuance here.
And I also say, Florida, just nationwide, Trump is still ahead of DeSantis. I mean, Florida is not Alabama. Florida is not Texas, right? So just look at the Republican primary states that were, and then make your assessment as to whether or not DeSantis is just a bygone conclusion. He's going to be the nominee. I mean, there's so many other factors into why I think Trump is still poised to take the nomination. Of course, like Mr. Egwood said, I mean, anything can happen. We've seen so many things happen in recent years. But as it pertains right now, the party itself has not done anything to kind of gravitate away from Trump until after the midterm results. Now everyone's like, okay, now it's time to get rid of Trump. But it's too abrupt, right? I mean, you've been with this guy too long. You can't just walk away now and expect the base and all the people to just walk in your direction because you find that it's more politically viable to do so.
But don't they have 2 years to kind of make that rotation? It's abrupt just because it would be abrupt if the election was next month. But they got 2 years to turn this ship to really get behind DeSantis.
Trump has expedited this process. We're already in 2024's election cycle. So
no, absolutely. But we got 2 years. We got 2 years, and a lot can happen in 2 years. Trump is a lot older than DeSantis, and to add to what the gentleman was saying about Ron DeSantis is a councilman in Florida. He also took the media head on, or the left-wing media, when they were trying to label him as homophobic and label a legislation that he was supporting as a "Don't Say Gay" bill, when it was primarily about keeping sexual illicit information from children under grade of 3 and under. So it wasn't about marginalizing one talking point of sexuality versus another. It was about, hey, we don't want that kind of content taught to children under the age of 3. And I think that was one of the things that really helped boost the status up, because that's also one of the things that I think really galvanizes people around Trump, is that he's not afraid to combat modern ideology for traditional ideology if he has to.
You don't have 2 years, because people will starting to make presidential announcements in the spring of next year. I mean, they'll be having debates, presidential debates, in the fall of next year, because the New Hampshire primaries is like in January of 24. So, I mean, there's 2 years stuff. You have a few months.
You say January 24 or 23?
The New Hampshire primary is in January of 24.
Okay, right. So you still got to get.
So no, but they'll be campaigning in the fall of 24. they have to raise money. You know, these people, they're going to be announcing in the spring and summer of next year.
Winter.
Yeah, I mean, probably before the spring is out. You're muted, Ish.
Oh, sorry. I'm like, from the time that people go to the ballot box, I know all the big machine that is American politics, but I think Trump's era has began to cut through that. You know, and I said this last time on and while I was on the show. We're still really embracing the way that social media and technology informs American voters about politics. If we saw it, we saw a lot of worry about how it can be used by foreign interference in 2016. There was some concern about that, but there's also a lot of potential for good. This may actually get our voter turnout up. So, and I think that'd be a good thing for everyone, because I think if people vote, we hold these elected officials accountable, and then I think it's a better place for everyone.
I could agree.
Well, Mike, if I could just ask one question to you and the panel, since most of you are some of you at least are lawyers. What at this point is taking the DOJ and Merrick Garland? I mean, what are they waiting for at this point? You know, I mean, shouldn't we get shouldn't we get an indictment here soon? I mean, for conspiracy to defraud the United States, the one thing we know he did. I mean, at what point? I mean, what are we waiting for? This is, I mean, maybe you can help me out.
It's
political. I agree. I think
political now.
I think
it's about the structural integrity and reputation of the American institutions on some level as well.
This is, you know, the DOJ during the transition between Bill Barr and Merrick Garland issued a memorandum that was agreed to continue under Merrick Garland, that a political candidate cannot be subject to DOJ investigation for fear of politicization of the DOJ. And that's why I think I agree with you, Mr. Frost. I think that window of opportunity has now narrowed even more now that he has announced that he's a presidential candidate. I agree with you that, you know, it seemed as if the DOJ was moving slowly. And even after the Mar-a-Lago raid, it seemed as if there was some tangible evidence to show that Donald Trump breached and violated federal law as it pertained to classified information. I don't know what's taking so long. I think a lot of it is motivation and fear of the DOJ looking political and Joe Biden looking like he's going against his likely political foe in 2024.
Do you think anyone wants to put handcuffs on a former president of the United States, or do you think they get the guts to do that?
The thing is, it's not. This country was founded upon no man being above the law.
Yes.
And so the DOJ can't say, you know, well, his position is causing us to have, you know, pause as to whether or not we should put. I mean, once we get to I remember watching the Comey Rule, HBO series that came out around the election of 2020. It was very good. If you haven't seen it, I think it's excellent. And the actor who plays as James Comey says, the minute I start thinking about folks' political futures and fortunes is the day I need to resign from this position immediately. And of course, he was acting as James Comey was the head of the FBI at the time, who was then subsequently fired by Trump abruptly in 2017.
Yeah, we have him on tape. We have him on audio tape. So this is not a question. It's not a question. The facts are the January 6th committee and the people in Georgia. You know, they've done the heavy lifting. So I mean, you know, I mean, I'm just flabbergasted as to, you know, because he expedited this announcement to get ahead of that, to, you know, to kind of inoculate himself from prosecution. And, you know, I mean, they're not going to let him do it, are they? I mean, that's.
Yeah, I think that RC was actually about to say that it's no longer about, you know, like a justice situation. Because I feel like we all know that when the DOJ has the information, they're going to act, and they're going to act very quickly. And so it's not.
We know that?
Well, not in this case, but like the DOJ can act. And so I think that. at this point, it's gone above the realm of just like, oh, the evidence that's in front of us. And it's more so, and I mean, I don't think that it's wrong of them to take into consideration what political implications this could have, but I do think that it's gone beyond the realm of just, oh, this is what we're doing, this is what we have to do. And it's entered into politicization. And to answer what you said, Ish, about does anybody really want to put a former president in handcuffs? I think that when it's an issue that has to come, when it's an issue that deals with morality, people have an issue. But when it's an issue that has to deal with the actual laws of this country, I think that it makes it a lot more plain and clear what needs to happen. And so I think that that's really what highlights the lack of action here, is that this isn't, of course, there's right and there's left. There's, I feel this way about Trump, I feel this way. But there's also just like, there's a clear violation of the laws that this country has been built upon. And so that in of itself, it delegitimizes the agencies, it delegitimizes the branches of government, and delegitimizes the way that we even vote. Everything is hanging in the balance of this, situation. And that for me is what's more concerning than just like the indictment. It's also just like our government on a federal level, on a local and politics, state election level, it seems like it's being delegitimized by this one issue because we're taking so long to act. And so I feel like that's where things really get muddied, more so than just like, are they taking so long because it's Donald Trump? It's like, what does this say about how we enforce what our laws are?
I will add that this comes at. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I know a lot of people were frustrated specifically with Josh Hawley because of the fist, right? Or should I say Senator Josh Hawley, then also Senator Tom Cotton. And, that made, really, right? But people were, right? Because this was an attack on our country. And I think the question, so this is just my perspective, I don't know if the right question is for the DOJ relative compared to is why did the Senate not remove him? I just don't understand that. Why did the Senate not remove him? And so for me, I think about this, how can you have any type of some sort of integrity or credibility when we're talking about democracy in terms of diplomacy, right? And negotiations in the international domain when you have someone who's formerly a president launching an attack on our country, right? And so for a lot of senators, for a lot of folks that are saying that they care about international perception or they're caring about national security, this is a direct threat. This is a direct threat, the candidacy of Donald Trump in 2024. And so I think if you want to sit here and tell me you care about a Republican agenda, okay, we can debate that. But for me, it's a non-starter if you're telling me that you're going to put Donald Trump as your candidate, because I just don't believe that you're really interested in what we have here in the United States. But that's, again, my perspective.
I will add that this comes, in addition to the fact that you've got Trump's inaugural committee chair, Tom Barrack, a good friend of his, being acquitted in Brooklyn on all charges and of being an unregistered lobbyist for the United Arab Emirates. The Justice Department said that he acted as the eyes and ears and the voice for the Emirates as part of a criminal conspiracy to manipulate Trump's foreign policy. This is also after Steve Bannon basically is, giving the middle finger up to Congress's subpoena, right? And so there's a environment where it seems as if all of these Trump folks seem like they're above the law. I know Ethan Tillman, faithful viewer, saying investigations take time, but there are certain things that were known for a while now, and that is that Trump had ordered many of his, those working for him to take punitive actions against his political enemies as it pertains to using the IRS to hone in and investigate them and look for ways to punish them. These are things that, it's not just the fact that he took documents from to Mar-a-Lago. There's a huge slew of things. Lawrence Tribe actually mentioned that there's over 50 charges that they could potentially bring upon Donald Trump in terms of violations of federal law. And so I think it's a question that, like Ishmael raised, are they considering the political implications that this could have on the country of indicting a former president? I will remind you. I'm sorry.
I was going to say like possible civil unrest. Like that's something maybe trying to consider.
I will say that Gerald Ford made that mistake in '74, and I think it cost him any hopes of election in 76 when he decided to pardon Nixon because he was afraid of the division of the country. The country's divided already. The question now is, will the rule of law be upheld?
Yeah, and I'm not making any qualitative statements. I'm just saying that I just think that's maybe an answer to the question of why that. And it's a brilliant question by Professor Foster, because I think it's, and I think we've touched on a lot of the cogent parts of that, which is mainly that phone call. The phone call itself, as someone who like to think I got a little bit of sense, it sounded like he broke the law, plain as day.
That's the very rule of law is rendered null and void if somebody can break the law that blatantly, that openly, and there be no consequences at all. Then why are you arresting anybody for anything? That's where we are. Why? I mean, it's like, not only is the rule of law being rendered null and void, but democracy. This is a guy who refuses to accept the results of an election that he doesn't win. Just on the basis that he didn't win. And he telegraphed that ahead of time. At what point in time if we're going to be intimidated, if we as a nation are going to be intimidated by the ilk that that did the January 6th stuff, then the nation is toast anyway. If we're going to be afraid to enact and enforce duly passed law, just because we think this guy might start something, or his followers might start something, we're gone.
But you might be putting it mildly as start something. Like, I don't know. I'm just having the conversation and talking about this topic generally. But let's just say 10 million people. I don't know the scale and the tail risk possibilities for this type of event. But the people in power and in control of the government, they do have to be very, very much concerned, and they do know, and that's why I raise as a possibility of why we not getting the justice that seems to be due.
So on that note, we have come to the end. I do want to open the floor if there are any last thoughts before we conclude the episode tonight.
I'm happy to add some last thoughts. I'm very much so a policy person. I'm policy. Let's get out. Let's talk about it. Let's debate the ideas. I strongly believe that if my idea in terms of policy is better than yours, we should be able to stand out and have a debate and follow the rules of debate, right? And see where we can go from there. I think oftentimes in the political realm, you have people that shy from the debate, run away from the debate, in a variety of ways, right? Not one particular person or one particular, party. So I think that's really important, because at the end of the day, based upon where you are in our country regionally, these topics we're discussing, you're going to perceive them differently. You're going to understand them differently. And so that's really important, to take it back to the fundamentals, and let's talk about the policy, and let's talk about the issues, if that makes sense. And so thanks so much, Mike, for having me on yet another time. And I really appreciate this discourse that we've had coming from our ranges of perspectives, panelists, and a huge shout out to the audience. Y'all have a great night.
With that being said, thank you so much, Mr. Rongpa, Arsene Frederick Jr., Mr. Stephen Foster, Joy Vendura, Ishmael Ibrahim, Nate Honore. It's been a fantastic discussion. You guys have kept it lively. Thank you all so much for what you brought to the table. I do want to encourage the viewers who tune in every week to refrain from sketchy sources of news and challenge the sources of news that you plug into. It's crucial as just a member of this society, especially a democratic country like the one we're living in, to kind of understand the sources of news that you're getting and compare them to other sources of news. It's a vital part. You want to be an informed voter. With that being said, thank you all so much. For those in Georgia, remember the runoff election season starts the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and the election day is the 6th of January. The 6th of December. Sorry. With that being said, this will conclude episode 85 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you all so much.